Thanks, everyone. I think so far in this talk, maybe the next talk deals with the West, but I'm the westernmost speaker of the talk. How many of you have been to Salt Lake City? So the airport, that doesn't count. So I will try to give you a sense of smart growth on the other side of the Mississippi, which can be quite different than some of the things I've been hearing here, and is quite similar in other regards, too. I'm starting here with the list of smart growth principles developed in conjunction with the EPA in '96. You can see this looks to me sort of like a smorgasbord list of a variety of features that require organization. So I reorganized those into my sense that there are place goals, communities that are compact, mixed use, range of housing, favoring built areas, preserving open space. Process goals, and this is where I think smart growth is distinctive in that it really does tend to talk about development goals. Development is fair, predictable, cost-effective. Oh yes, and involves stakeholders and community. I don't think you can get around that as well. Transportation goals. Now this is where, as a psychologist, I get to be especially interested in how people actually act and behave in these developments. Is walkability design enough to make people walk? Are people taking options beyond the car? And then psychology goals gets kind of shoved to the end there, and they talk about sense of place, which I'm not sure anyone has really defined. So let's take a look at how some smart growth residents actually feel about their residential settings. For me as a psychologist, the danger here is claim creep. You know, you talk about physical environments in one sentence, and then you leap to the consequent behaviors and feelings in the next sentence. So I would like to see more evidence about how people actually live in these places. And smart growth in conjunction with new urbanist developers have crept the claims up. They're saying it's beyond sense of place to sense of community, safe and attractive neighborhoods, income and racial integration, less automobile dependence, more walking, biking, etc. So this is a long list of claims, and my research can't speak to all of them, but I think one challenge for the field is to start speaking to these claims and to evaluate how well these places are working. As we've heard this morning, standard suburbs are a long-standing, powerful vision. You notice I use the word vision, not personal choice, because it is embedded within culture and history. So the low-density, single-use, car-dependent suburb is the majority of what you see around, and most of those are single-family detached homes. So in the face of that vision, what do? We're learning through the smart growth movement and other places that the suburban vision imposes this increasing number of costs. And we heard about this the other day about how our vision is getting literally larger as the footprint of homes gets bigger over the years, despite the shrinkage of household sizes. And somebody was asking for this information the other day, so I hope that gentleman's still here. Here's a slide on the energy costs involved. So the green line at the top is total energy use is on a trend up. The blue line trending bottom is energy intensity, so we're getting more energy efficient appliances and such. But the other two top lines represent the total number of households is driving up our energy use, and our housing size, the next dashed line down, is also driving up our energy use. And if you put those trends together, it suggests that we need to deal with the reality that we need different types of housing. We've got more singles, more elderly individuals living alone, more single-parent families, so all those demographic drivers suggest we need more affordable housing in smaller households. We need to have less dependence on finite, expensive, and polluting energy sources. And we need to tackle the global climate change issue. And I come from a state where our governor does not believe in global climate change. So it is an especially important challenge for those of us out west in some areas where these kinds of things are still spoken of as fiction. The added dilemma is that we are the wild, wild west. And when you talk about these realities, in housing, that means you have to increase density of development. And density is scary. Density evokes NIMBY fears. I just had as I was doing some of this work, I started clipping some of the headlines from the paper. Renters unfit for area. I mean, I think here maybe you have more environmental objections to growth. We get it right into class warfare. Renters are unfit for the area. They have too many kids that take over too many school dollars and have too many cars that clog our streets. Draper tightly limits multifamily homes, so I will be talking about some work that was done in Draper, which is a suburb in the south end of Salt Lake County. And my question is, in this political situation where density is feared, what do the residents think? What do people who live in smart growth and new urbanist areas say? So my research strategy has been to compare residents in a quasi-experimental design who live in smart growth or new urban areas compared to standard suburban residents. And I compare them either over time as they get more smart growth features in their neighborhood or between groups. And I try to control for competing explanations. As you just heard in the prior talk, this is a difficult challenge to make it work statistically. And then I test for behavioral and psychological differences between groups. So today I'll share with you two examples from studies I've done in the past. One is about a new urban light rail stop, and the other is more of a suburban new urbanist subdivision study. First, does TRAX light rail promote walking, healthy weight, satisfaction, and attachment? So in this study, you may have seen this picture from Peter Calthorpe. The ideal transit-oriented development has a rail stop in the center with open space and residential and commercial and jobs all within convenient walking distance in a very attractive setting. That's the ideal. In reality, a lot of these TODs start out in abandoned rail corridors where the surrounding land use has not been designed over the last decades to be an ideal TOD around light rail. So what I studied was the addition of a light rail stop. If you are used to visiting Utah, you would come in at the airport over here, the university is here, downtown is here, and right south of downtown was the new stop that was planned for this interesting neighborhood. And the question is, does getting this kind of smart growth transit hub relate to how much residents around there drive, how much they walk? You know, if you think about using light rail, it involves at least 4 walking trips if you're walking to the stop, to and from and at your destination. Does it relate to their weight or their psychological benefits of place attachment and residential satisfaction? And then I just looked at whether there were other surprises involved. The neighborhood is not your ideal TOD area. It has, on this western edge, warehouse district. The small area here is housing. And then State Street is a commercial corridor with, you know, auto shops and sports bars and things like that. This was a small intensive study, 103 residents interviewed before the stop went in. We went back a year later, actually 38 of those had moved because it's a high transience neighborhood, but we managed to convince 50 to stick with us and give us data on their experiences. Here's an example of the new subsidized housing that was built prior to the track stop opening. So they were taking advantage of some of the federal supports for building affordable housing. Again, it's not your cutesy new urbanist kind of style, but it serves a purpose and is really needed in this neighborhood. This is the rest of the neighborhood. This is what the private housing in the area looks like. Some of it, like the upper corner there, is well kept, well landscaped. Others in need of repair. Converted warehouses, small apartment complexes. So the average income, household income here was $24,000 when we were doing the study. We interviewed the residents before and after the new stop, and here are a couple of my research assistants with participants. We actually haul the scales and the stadiometers and everything into their house, measure them, and we split the group into 3 groups. Those who didn't ride tracks before the new stop went into the neighborhood and didn't ride tracks after the new stop went in. Those who became new riders when the stop got closer to their house, and those who had been riding the stop at both times. First question is easily answered. Do people ride tracks when you bring a stop closer to their neighborhood? Yeah, we got an 18.75% increase over baseline ridership. We were disappointed to see that 50% were already riding because that meant they went to the less convenient stops, and it made it more difficult for us to find differences. You know, if we'd been looking at the end of the line, new stop, we might have found larger differences, but we were pleased with this. So the time 2, you can see how the new 9th South stop on the purple arrow there has been added. So the residents could have walked to the 13th South stop before. They could have used the courthouse stop to the north. Car trips. This is one of the big differences pre and post. The non-riders, they're car dependent no matter what. The people who've been using tracks, even when it was an inconvenient long walk from their house, they don't use car trips that much, but it's that middle group, the new riders, who are really showing the benefit. So they're clearly substituting rides on tracks from rides in cars. And that's been debated in the literature, whether that kind of substitution happens or just augmentation. So this was clear substitution. The physical activity measures, we use accelerometers, which is like pedometers on steroids. Accelerometers are these small red devices that you wear around your belt, and they actually measure metabolic energy expenditures. So the Centers for Disease Control tells you you need about 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day. This is the device that measures whether you're getting the moderate threshold. So those spiky lines are showing activity, and when it goes above the red line, that's when you're in the moderate category. So according to the CDC, you need these in 8 to 10 minute bouts. So like that third bout over, it's probably not an 8 to 10 minute bout. It doesn't count for your health according to the CDC. But the fourth jagged line would probably be a bout. So if you're looking at this and saying, gee, Pete, that person wasn't really active, this is where the health researchers are very excited now because survey after survey, about half of you say you get your 30 minutes a day. They've just started putting accelerometers on people and find that in the adult population, fewer than 5% get your 30 minutes a day. So we say more than we do, which is not surprising to a psychologist. So moderate bouts of physical activity. I'm going to hit you with some line graphs here, but you'll notice how consistent they are. Now the gaps between the two lines is not significant, but the differences across groups is. So the non-TRAX riders get fewer bouts of activity, the new riders get an intermediate amount, and the persistent riders get the most. This was really surprising to me. We know obesity is an epidemic now, but over 60% of those people who would not walk the 5 minutes to the new stop and try out TRAX were obese. So that's a whopping difference between the non-riders and the riders. So the new riders and the persistent riders, both around 20% or less obesity rates. Going in psychologically, place attachment. How much would you hate moving from the neighborhood? How proud are you of the neighborhood? How proud are you of your house? Those kinds of more psychological bonds to the neighborhood. Interesting. TRAX, the advent of TRAX doesn't change things, but depending upon your place attachment, you're more or less likely to take advantage of the TRAX opportunity. Again, those non-riders were not attached to their neighborhood. New riders, intermediate level, persistent riders showed strong place attachment to this neighborhood. Same pattern for neighborhood satisfaction. So again, there's something about being prepared to take advantage of smart growth opportunities like new transit stops that is important but has not been acknowledged before because nobody's gone in before people get these kinds of opportunities. I also asked them about surprises. In general, people expected the TRAX stop to increase property values and economic opportunities and those kinds of things, and afterwards they said, yeah, it did some of this. I'm focusing here just on the one item that was a surprise to them. They expected having this big light rail stop in their neighborhood was going to make for pedestrian and child safety issues. So you can see the blue lines at the bottom. They were expecting safety to decrease. But once it was in, the purple lines at the top, no big deal. So I think it's useful to go in and address residents' fears about some of these changes that go along with increasing density and to show when they're not valid. And in fact, one of the residents said, yeah, those professional TRAX drivers are safer than the regular drivers in the neighborhood. So it's nice to hear what kinds of unanticipated benefits go along with TRAX use. So for this study, that picture, by the way, is the people tree at the TRAX stop. They got the residents in the neighborhood to put their faces into these sand casts that were then made into glass and put on this tree. So it's another way of bonding to the neighborhood. Yeah?
Could you tell us, when you did the study, the time zone between when they put the TRAX in and when you did the study?
Let's see, I finished round one by October. They opened the TRAX stop at the end of October, and then I went back the subsequent summer to measure them again. Yeah. So it's about a year. So in summary, in this study, the light rail use related to less driving, and then there was this correlational relationship between those who were active, who used TRAX, those who had healthy weight used TRAX, those who were satisfied and attached used TRAX, and the bonus finding that there's more traffic safety than anticipated. Okay, going on to the second example, very different. We were at Night South for the track stop, think 144 south. So we're at the southeastern edge of the county now. And you're coming in the main road here. And this circle area is the area designated for commercial development. As you can see in the picture, commercial's not quite there yet. So again, this is an imperfect evaluation of a new urbanist site. But what was extraordinary is, look at the townhomes. This is in Draper, where they were severely restricting the multifamily residences. Draper had been zoning for 1, 5, 10-acre lots before this development came in. So the easy thing for the developer would have been to go with 1, 5, 10-acre lots. Instead, this developer tried to do something different, worked closely with the city, and had to rewrite dozens and dozens of regulations to get this project in on the ground. The subdivision that I studied was not the townhomes, but this area around the townhomes, because I was interested in that whole new urbanist idea of putting the alleys in back of the houses and allowing people to put accessory dwelling units over top their garages. So last night, if you were there at the talk, you heard that Salt Lake City has now loosened up its accessory dwelling unit regulations, and Draper actually led the way, which is kind of odd. So here's a view from the pictures taken from the alley, looking to the garage in back of the owner's house, and then you can see the townhomes again close by to get you oriented there. So what you get in the front is this porchscape look. You look down the street and there's all these porches. Then in the bottom picture, you're going around, this is a house on a corner, so this is the accessory dwelling unit for this house, and the garage belongs to the people in the big house, and the renter or whatever you want up above can use the accessory apartment. Here's just another style. They were also hoping to get active seniors who enjoyed one-level living, so a smaller house at the top, but they still had their accessory dwelling unit in the back. I compared that with a standard subdivision about a mile away. This is typically what was being built in the area, the garage fronts, sited on cul-de-sacs, very typical development in the area. Just a summary of the physical differences. The lot sizes in the new urbanist kind of area were smaller, garages in back, porches on the front, short setbacks between the sidewalk and the front of the house, narrower streets. They also had some walking paths through the area, alleys, and apartments were allowed, in contrast to the suburban area. I'm not going to drag you through my multivariate analysis of covariance except to focus on the red. The sense of community, there was no difference. So I do worry about these claims that new urbanism enhances a sense of community. If you look at sense of community scales, they're often about my neighbors and I can work to improve this neighborhood. We can fight problems in this neighborhood. I'm really close to people here. I feel like my values are supported in this neighborhood. And I don't think that this type of development necessarily leads to that. This development was also just a few years old, so it may take some time to get to that deep level of sense of community. But I'll walk you through pictures of the other differences. The new urbanist residents scored higher than the suburban residents on neighborhood activity. So this was before I had accelerometers. I didn't actually strap them up and measure them, but I asked them if they were walking in the neighborhood, and they said yes. They were using the local recreation amenities. They walked the neighborhood, knew a lot of their neighbors by name, and engaged in small talk. And that may not be a deep sense of community, but I think that's really what a lot of people enjoy about some of these neighborhoods, is that more superficial, hi, how are you kind of connection. I was interested again in the alleys, and the pro findings was that the new urbanists were much more favorable than the suburbanites on saying that the front of their street looks good. So the garage fronted suburbanites were not especially enamored with the look of their cul-de-sacs. The new urbanists did like theirs. They also said that the alleys reduce traffic, less traffic in the front because the cars are routed to the back, and the alleys are fairly safe. But both groups say that alleys are not a place for kids to play. So that's a problem. And then the new urbanist group was especially likely to say that their alleys were too crowded with cars. I mean, that's what the alleys were built for, but they didn't like the look of the alleys being crowded with cars. What was really interesting to me, especially in the light of all those headlines, was that there weren't complaints about the neighbors. They didn't say, oh, those renters are terrible. They're just saying the alleys and the cars were terrible. The new urbanist residents also really like the private property rights issues of being able to build an apartment over your garage if you wanted to. And they really liked the front porches, and the suburbanites wished they'd had front porches rather than the stoops that they have to have if they have that big garage front. They didn't like the short front yards that helps them get to the density in the new urbanist development. And Salt Lake City gets a lot of snow, so they didn't really like the detached idea of the garage, where you have to walk around and go in your back door through the snow. So that was not well liked. But they still lived there. You know, it wasn't a killer part of the deal for them. Here's my illustration of how the alley design was a problem. That top picture shows an informal parking pad being developed there. If they had renters, they were supposed to develop a full parking pad, and this wasn't always enforced. So neighbors didn't like that kind of look of the informal parking areas developing. And then this alley is crowded with cars. And if you look at this alley, when I gave these pictures at the Seaside Institute, the home of New Urbanism, they said, that's not an alley. That looks like a regular engineered street. You gotta learn how to do alleys better. So that's a fairly simple solution. If you did alleys better, anticipating the cars, maybe making a more permeable surface like we heard about yesterday, that would be a more sustainable option for this alley design. And I like my SUV butt overhang picture because, you know, they just made the aprons for the parking areas a little too short for the reality of the SUVs in Utah, and people put stuff in their garage that'll park there anyway. So this is what you get, is one butt overhang after another, and that doesn't look like their idea of what their alley should look like. But you don't have to do alleys the way we did them. Like I say, that was a pioneering project. They had to change so many rules, and everyone was so worried about the snow that they probably over-engineered those alleys. But in Kentlands, Maryland, or other places, they actually put basketball standards in the alleys. They have more planting ordinances. They have narrower alleys with more permeable surfaces. So I think these are all minor design fixes that I think the planners there learned for the next project down the road. They could make these kinds of adjustments and get more what the residents would like. So in this middle income area, new urbanism was related to more neighboring and reported walking. The problems were not with the renters. All those NIMBY fears that people were yelling about at local community organizations did not materialize. So having accessory dwelling units over homes where the landlord is on site may be one way to help densify the suburbs. We also learned about better designs being possible. You know, just show those alleyway pictures to any good designer and they'll come up with a dozen ways to improve it. So the question is, does shrinking the lot size from about a quarter acre down to about 1/1600 of an acre make a difference? This is in Utah with a 2.2% growth rate where that population will double in like 32 years. That's high growth. These are pictures from Envision Utah suggesting that small changes can make big differences. They had scenarios where in 1998 our average lot size was over 1/3 of an acre, and they were saying, what if for the next 30 years we change to an average of 0.29 acres? It would save us 283 square miles. Now your pictures of the green areas and the undeveloped land, Utah, about 70% of our land cannot be developed because it's federal land. So we have God's urban growth boundary. You know, we don't have a law for an urban growth boundary, but a lot of the area can't be developed. So these kinds of solutions will make a big difference for a high growth state. So in sum, I say that researching these kinds of early innovations are important. None of the examples will ever be perfect. So I think we just need a variety of people going out there and evaluating these new attempts to do transit-oriented development, new urbanist development, and we are learning things. We're learning about how you might want to take into account residents' feelings about their neighborhood in order to encourage smart growth use. We're learning that accessory apartments are not going to be the death knell of neighborhoods and that the problems they impose are fixable. And both studies, I think, pretty much support the idea that from the resident's perspective, these innovations can work. But as an academic, I have to end on, but of course, more research is needed as we go forward with these iterations. Thank you.